Next up, we've got a talk that is Unlocking the iOS Platform for User Growth. And big round of applause and welcome our speaker on stage, please, guys.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Paulo Trezentos. I'm co-founder and CEO of Aptoide. And today I will raise some questions, more questions than answers, and give you some numbers, some facts about regulation and how this can have impact in user acquisition in iOS, and a little bit outside iOS as well. To start with, just in a nutshell, Aptoide, just for you to know what we do, we have a booth out there. So we have 50 million monthly active users in our ecosystem of apps distribution. So we operate app stores. We push our content from our developers to 10 app stores, 4 of them operated by us, 6 operated by partners. And we get users for new users for the developers that work with us. We work with more than 100,000 certified applications. Most question asked us is how much we can grow the revenue. Of course, depends on the type of game or app, but typically 10 to 20% on top of what is done in Google Play, because mostly we operate in Android at the time being. Our geographies are mostly US and Europe, but we do have users a little bit, those 50 million across different regions. Deep diving on iOS platform and regulations and what's going on that can have impact in user acquisition. So just very quickly, there are 1.4 billion iPhone users. The last number we got is that in 2022, Apple paid $60 billion to developers, and that Google and Apple together control 95% of in-app purchase that is going on through games and apps outside web-based shops. And also that 75% of iOS users choose to opt out from tracking, also important to understand the following slides. And iOS users are typically more valuable than Android users. So there is these sources that say that they spend usually more 2.5 times than the Android user. So where are developers investing in acquisition of users? So I tried to, in this table, to summarize from different sources where are being invested the money, and we can see that in paid marketing is typically where developers need to invest more to get users. So much more than organic nowadays, and typically we see social media ads, ad networks, and advanced strategies like lookalike audience and advanced analytics to take the most of the investment. There are also organic marketing and other strategies, but those are the ones that take more money and create more investment. And one question also interesting is understanding, okay, we know that the iOS users are typically more valuable than Android users. How about the customer acquisition cost? Typically, these are two different sources just for us to cross them, and typically they are also more expensive, as you likely know. So, for instance, Adjust says that it could be, depending on the genre, of course, from 56 cents in 2024 to $1.74, while, for instance, Misplay, foreseen for their platform, of course, incentivized rewarded ads, that is between 30 to 50% more in iOS, cost of acquisition. We also know these just to get it from different sources. How about acquisition is, because when we talk with different people in meetings, everybody gets the perception that the acquisition cost in iOS is getting more expensive. So looking into different acquisition platforms, Meta Ads, TikTok, Google Ads, and networks, we can see that in the last years, 5 years, since 2021, 2021, the costs have been rising 60% in average across these platforms, just in iOS alone. So actually the cost of acquisition the users is increasing. And what is the top 3 reasons? The main one is, of course, the app tracking transparency introduced in iOS 14 back in 2021 and 14.5, and that introduces the difficulty to access the IDFA, which makes tracking and targeting much harder. But there is also, from different sources, the perception of increased competition in the mobile marketing. There is more competition, more developers trying to get user attention. They cannot get it organically, so they need to acquire the users through paid performance and other channels. And also the ad platform inflation. As there was more merging and consolidation in ad platforms, we see that actually the price of acquiring the users and the margins of the ad networks themselves are growing, and that of course have impact in the acquisition cost of the users. And if we, having the previous slides, we can see that the main acquisition costs and retention costs are platform costs. The fee charged by Apple and by Google of 30%, but also the acquisition cost in paid marketing strategies, as I just shown. So how this can be somehow worked out with the current regulations and court decisions. So I introduce here 3 regulations and 1 court decision that might have impact in your strategy for the future in terms of iOS user acquisition. I will start in Europe by Digital Markets Act that was introduced in 2022 in European Union, the 27 countries, and that somehow tried to regulate how big tech and the big companies operate in the market, creating competition and creating better conditions for app developers. This EU Digital Markets Act, as I said, was being passed in 2022, but is a very slow timeline. So it gives first designated gatekeepers around 2023, gives them time to comply, and so on and so on. I will say in which moment we are on DMA, but before that I will introduce other 2 regulations that can have impact in your business. The first is here in UK. So in UK we'll have a very similar law called DMCC, Digital Markets Competition and Consumer Bill, that was passed in May 2024, last year. That law is very similar to the DMA, it was inspired in that, and the same openness that DMA pushed in iOS ecosystem we'll see in UK as well. And finally, another regulation, Japan. So in Japan, in June, just 1 month after DMCC, there was passed the Smartphone Act law that actually opens Japan also to more competition in the digital markets and specifically in app stores and app distribution. So we see that the regulators across these 3 regions and countries are somehow aligning the same kind of push for Apple and Google. And lastly, a court decision. So in the United States, Epic, as you might see, sued Google and Apple. And Apple decision was not so favorable to Epic, but the Google was. So what the court last year said to Google is that Google would have to do remedies because it was hurting the competition in US. It was a court decision, not a regulation or a law. And the Judge Donato, decided that Google had to do several things. One of them was to allow other app stores, like Aptoide App Store, Epic App Store, and others, to be distributed through Google Play. This would mean that when the decision is implemented, you could search for Epic Game Store or Aptoide Game Store inside Google Play, which, as you can imagine, lowered the friction for other app stores to be installed in Android. Secondly, it decided that the other app stores, it's a little bit amazing, this decision, other app stores must have access to the catalog of Google Play, the 3 million applications. And the developers don't need to opt in, just have the possibility to opt out. This, of course, would reduce the friction for the users to find things that are useful in other app stores. And some other smaller remedies. These 2 were the most important ones. And this is important, why? Because Google appealed from this decision, so in this moment is under the appeal court, and we'll see soon what is the result of that appeal from Google. If this decision applies, we can see first in Android, I would say much more competition in the apps distribution in US, that might spill over other regions after this. So this is what, there are other things going on, of course, we don't have in 20 minutes time to go through all of them, but these are the ones I think have more impact for user acquisition in iOS. I mentioned some of the Android cases because it's really interesting and could have impact in iOS as well. What are the impacts of these changes in terms of game developers and app developers? So the first thing is in these regions, and for the time being in Europe, but as I said in UK and Japan in 2025, improved revenue fee from the App Store from 30% to 20%. This is something that the app developers can already do. They have some caveats. I will try to explain those caveats, but it's already available in Europe. The second one is outside the App Store, also alternative stores and distributions in iOS. There are 3 official app stores today, Aptoide, Epic, and Altstore. So this means that in Europe, those 3 stores are available to get new users. And finally, alternative billing options, also foreseen by Digital Markets Act, DMCC, and Smartphone Act, that allows billing options and external links to be available in Android and iOS. This is also covered. So these 3 things are where the developers can get an upside from the current regulation. Well, of course, Apple will not try to give this $180 billion market without some friction. So in order for you to accomplish these 3 things or 3 opportunities that I just mentioned in the previous slide, Apple introduced 3 different frictions. The first friction is that developers that want in Europe to benefit from the 20% reduced fee must sign the new distribution terms. Those distribution terms, of course, have some kind of downsides as well. But Apple introduced something very curious, is that if you sign by the new distribution terms and you distribute it to an alternative app store, you cannot go back, clearly creating fear under the developers. The second one is you need to submit your app, your Apple iOS app, not to the App Store itself, like in Android, but you need to submit to Apple notarization system. Actually, it works well. It's not a big burden, but it goes through Apple Connect. Third and last, and this is the most well-known, you must have heard about it, which is core technology fee of 50 cents of euro that the developer and the App Store, by the way, in addition, have to pay to Apple. Those 50 cents, this is somehow difficult to understand. It's 50 cents per user per year, which means if the user installs 2 times a year, the developer just pays once. But if it installs 1 time in December and it installs again in January, the next year, you pay twice. Okay? This is the core technology fee. Of course, this is a big burden to developers and to app stores, so that's why the Commission opened a formal investigation against Apple in June 2024. So it's ongoing a formal investigation where the Commission actually addresses not only these points, but the 4th one. And the 4th one is the friction that Apple is introducing for installation alternative app stores. So until March 2025, not far away from now, Apple has to comply with the things that it needs to comply with Digital Markets Act. If Apple does not comply until March 2025, which made it 12 months, that was designated gatekeeper, it has to pay a fine that goes between 10 and 20% of the global GMV. So the entire Apple GMV, which is more or less 10% is how the revenue in Europe accounts for Apple. So what are the opportunities, the main categories of opportunities on iOS? First, user acquisition in ad networks, lowering the cost of the in-app purchase fee to something more around 10%. Second, to converting existing user base to existing users. Again, you can get a fee from Aptoide or your own web-based shop more around 5 to 10%, and get promoted and receive special featuring in alternative app stores. Because, of course, Aptoide, Epic, Altstore are getting better promotion and featuring to developers that onboard. What we suggest is first to adapt your compliance and to your rules to the new rules from Apple. Second, innovation, to think about business cases that could work in your platform. And finally, optimization through those business cases, could be organic, could be paid acquisition, to try to optimize on the iOS platform to these alternative channels. So just very quickly, as we are ending the time, but we are now working in Aptoide iOS with 30 game developers, mostly game developers, and we are working in business cases like paid acquisition in ad networks redirected to Aptoide iOS, direct to consumer, getting existing users, and organic promotion. It's easy for us to get the users. The user base is not as big as in Android, so we are talking a much smaller user base, but we are optimistic about the expansion in the future months under the new regulations in Japan and UK and others. Just a very quick example, I don't know if you can go through the video. Is the video on? If not, no problem. This would be the installation of an alternative store. Or we can, yeah, next one.
You gotta pick it.
I'll try again. No worries. So the video I had, and before going to the last slide, is just what is the flow to install Aptoide iOS in Europe, but we can see it online. Future outlook. As I mentioned, the regulations will push likely other markets to iOS, to open to iOS and alternative stores. My guess, but it's nothing public or a fact, but my guess it will be in iOS 18.4, foreseen to April, maybe later, but to comply with the DMCC and smartphone law should be around that age. And Google will likely need to change under not only the court case, but DOJ, the friction points in installation, unlocking new business cases. We see also Apple changing those 3 points, UI, UX, CTF, and more flexibility to developers under the formal investigation from the European Commission, and we'll see acquisition strategies that pay off and deliver more impact to your acquisition strategies. If you want to know more, you can look in any of the 3 app stores, official app stores approved by Apple that I just mentioned. You can also look into Apple have a calculator that allows you to see for your game how much you do pay under the new terms. And finally, if you want to deep dive on some of these topics, I have some articles in LinkedIn that might help you. Thank you very much.